Welcome back. So chapter 48 has a lot of material in it. In the first video, we talked about what real property is, easements, profits, licenses, obligations that are owed when you invite people onto your property, attractive nuisance doctrine, a lot of material. So what I wanted to do now was kind of come back for the second half of the chapter, which is co-ownership of property and mortgages. So let's get started. So co-ownership of real property is when you have multiple people who own the property. And so it's very similar to personal property as well. Condominiums are when people owe or own, like in DC, we had a townhouse and there were common areas that we all owned, but then inside the four walls of our townhouse, we owned that. Nobody else owned that. So it's individual ownership of a part of the space, but then equal rights to the common areas. So if you had a situation where we actually had like apartment buildings as well, and there would be 5 condominiums inside the building, those individual condominiums would be owned by the individual owners, but then the stairwells, the entryways, all of that is shared use. In the townhouse part, it was the shared use of the swimming pools, the tennis courts, the green space, the parking lots, those kinds of things. So condominiums, you've got individual ownership of essentially the apartment, but then common ownership of the shared spaces. Then in those situations, you're going to have the collection of expenses from the unit owner. So we were paying $300 a month in condo fees, and that covered a lot of different services that were provided. It also covers liability insurance that covers tort liability for when things happen in those common areas. Co-ops are a little bit different, and I don't have personal experience with co-ops, but usually you'll see these in big cities. And so the idea is that with a co-op, you're buying shares in the building, and then you have the right to use an apartment, but you don't own the apartment, where in the condominium, you actually own the apartment. So cooperatives, you own shares of the building or like stock in the building, but not the individual 4 walls of your unit. So that's kind of the distinction between condos and cooperatives. The other thing in there that I don't know why it's not showing up, but homeowners associations, that's kind of the subdivision equivalent of condominiums. So we all own our individual homes, but there are shared expenses like landscaping, depending on where the subdivision is, the roads, trash pickup, things like that. And so if there's water, like retention ponds and things like that, you need to make sure they have general liability insurance that covers the homeowners association, so you're not all individually paying for if someone gets hurt. Because remember, water is going to be an attractive nuisance for kids, and I will have shared examples of that with you in class. So now how do we transfer property? Now remember, because of my legs and statute of frauds, any document about ownership of land has to be in writing. So what that's called is a deed. And the deed, depending on where you live, is going to be 3 pages. And that has a description of the property. And there's an example in your book that shows you what a legal description looks like that we will have gone over. And then it just has a little bit of information around it. It would also include if there are easements, restrictions, things like that. So a quitclaim deed is not a kind of deed that you want. Basically, when someone's selling you real estate with a quitclaim deed, they're saying, whatever I own, I'm giving to you, but I'm not making any promises or conveying any warranties. A warranty deed is what you're usually going to get, and that's where the owner is making some specific promises to you about the property, and if anything falls apart, then they have to fix it. So warranty deed is what you want. So you're going to get them signed, and they're going to be notarized usually to prove that it's the right person. For the transfer of the deed to be effective, it has to actually leave your control. It has to be delivered to the new owner. A practical tip, make sure it actually gets filed. I've had cases where the deed just sat on the corner of the real estate agent's desk for a year. and it never got filed. And so I actually had this happen with my dad in one of his properties where one deed got filed and the other deed didn't. And then the original owner came back to Dad about 10 years later and said, okay, I want to sell you this parcel. And Dad's like, I already bought it. And so it took some finagling to get that unraveled. So you really want to pay attention to that. So recording of deeds isn't required, but it's very, very much encouraged. So there are 3 basic ways that if there's a dispute over ownership of the property, that the courts are going to decide who gets the property. So in race states, it's whoever gets to the courthouse first with the deed wins. In notice states, it's the last good faith purchaser who files, who gets the title. And good faith just means you don't have any idea that there's potentially other buyers out there. You think you're buying it good and without anybody in line before you. And so you're not potentially defrauding someone. And then notice race or race notice, it's all about who is the last bona fide purchaser who gets to the courthouse first. So I guess notice is you're the last good faith purchaser. So bottom line, get the deed filed, and then you're going to be protected. All right. And then additional protection, buyers protected by getting title insurance. Title insurance usually costs about $400, at least in Indiana and Virginia. And that's actually what protected my dad when the deed didn't get filed. We actually had to go to the bank to get the proof that the contract covered both parcels of land. And then we had to go to the title company and go, you screwed up. And so then because Dad had title insurance, then they have to fix it. It still cost Dad some money to get an attorney to start unraveling it, but then the burden shifted to the title company. That's what title insurance does. They do a check to make sure that there are no outstanding obligations on the property, and then they're going to make sure that if something goes wrong, they're on the hook for it. So it's very much worth it. So when you get a warranty deed, here are the warranties that are being made. Warranty is a title that you're conveying everything that you own, that you have the right to convey it, that there are no encumbrances. That's why you have to pay your mortgage and any liens before you get a profit from selling the real estate. Quiet enjoyment, nobody's going to bother the new owner. And if there's anything wrong, that you're going to step in and fix it. You'll provide any additional documents. You'll do any work that needs to be done to make sure that the new buyer can enjoy their property. Fitness for use, that's going to be implied if you're talking to the prospective purchaser and telling them, oh yeah, this will be perfect for that. So my sister's trying to sell an old Salvation Army that she had used as a dance studio, and she's showing it to people. And so she makes them a promise that, oh yeah, this is perfect for what you need it for. Then that's an implied warranty that it's fit for that use. Grantee, yeah, I'm not going to ask you about those. But they do have the grantee is the person who's buying the property, and they do have the right to enforce those warranties, and they can go to court if they need to. Eminent domain is the idea that the government can take property when it's for a public purpose. So the case that we're going to look at is the one in Connecticut. I think it's Keto. It starts with a K, but it was a really big Supreme Court case where Pfizer wanted to take over some land to build a big plant, and they got I think it was New London community to exercise eminent domain over these houses. Well, one lady fought him all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically said that eminent domain can be used for economic development purposes, which is much, much broader. Usually eminent domain is for roads or public buildings and things like that. Like the church we go to, I guess it's been about 7 years ago now. It's amazing how time flies. We were at one location, and now that's the on-ramp to 231 from 52 by Meyer. And so they used eminent domain to take our church, and we then moved. When they take it, they have to pay a reasonable price. And so that's usually, you'll fight on whether or not the government has the right to take the property, and then the second place you might fight is over the price and whether or not it's a fair price. Adverse possession, we talked about in the last video when we were talking about easements. It's the exact same thing here. It has to be visible, notorious, exclusive, hostile use for Indiana, it's 20 years. And so if that happens, if someone who's not the owner is using this land consistently for 20 years and it's public and notorious, then at that point in time, they now own the land by adverse possession. Mortgages, I'm not going to ask you a whole bunch of questions about this. Basically, a mortgage is related to the purchase of the property. And so it's a specific secured transaction related to purchasing real estate. And it's got to be in writing because it's related to land. Don't get into creative financing. That's why we had the whole 2007-2008 collapse. Reverse mortgages, those are mainly used when like retired individuals need money, and so they'll do a reverse mortgage on their home, and that basically takes the value out of their house to provide them with money up front. The mortgage needs to be filed. It should be filed, but even if it's not, it's still going to be binding because it's in writing. And then the mortgager, the person who owns the property, has to pay taxes, assessments, insurance, things like that. So you get what's called PMI insurance until you've got 20% equity in the property. That's sometimes why people will put down 20% so they don't have to pay the PMI insurance. But then you also need to have insurance against loss and things like that. All right. That is about it. Mortgages just aren't very fascinating. Yep. Okay, so foreclosure, we talked about this some with bankruptcy. Just a reminder that during the foreclosure process, they can stay in the home, but they can also stay the foreclosure by going through bankruptcy. All right, so that is real property. If you have any questions after being in class and watching these videos, please let me know, but hopefully that has helped to give you the context and to review the material.